What happens when a desperate single father's simple act of kindness on a frozen highway changes everything? When Daniel Hayes stopped to help a stranded driver that icy December morning, he had no idea the elegant woman behind the wheel held the power to transform his crumbling world. This is a story of unexpected love, impossible dreams, and the moment when fate decides to rewrite everything you thought you knew about your life. Stay with me until the end, and comment on your city so I can see how far this incredible journey has traveled. The alarm clock's shrill cry pierced through the thin walls of the Hayes cramped apartment at 5:47 a.m., 3 minutes before Daniel had set it to ring. He'd been awake for hours anyway, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked increasingly like a map of all the places he'd never take his daughter. The December wind howled through the loose window frame, carrying with it the bitter promise of another brutal Midwest winter. "Daddy!" Lily's sleepy voice drifted from the twin bed across their shared bedroom. At 7 years old, she possessed an intuition that often unnerved him, knowing when he was worried, when the bills were piling up, when the weight of their world pressed too heavily on his shoulders. "It's early, sweetheart. Go back to sleep." Daniel's voice was rough with exhaustion and the remnants of yesterday's cigarette, a habit he'd promised Sarah he'd quit, a promise that died with her 3 years ago. "I can't. Mrs. Henderson's cat is crying again." Daniel sighed. Their elderly neighbor's tabby had been wailing for weeks, much like everything else in Millbrook seemed to be crying out in pain. The small town had been hemorrhaging jobs since the factory closed, leaving behind empty storefronts, foreclosure signs, and dreams deferred indefinitely. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, his 34-year-old body protesting with aches that belonged to someone much older. The hardwood floor was ice cold beneath his bare feet as he padded to the kitchen, where he'd left his work clothes draped over a chair to dry. The washing machine had been broken for 2 months, and the laundromat ate up quarters he didn't have. The coffee maker sputtered to life, though calling it coffee was generous. It was more like brown water with delusions of grandeur, but it was hot and contained caffeine, which made it a necessity rather than a luxury. "Morning sunshine," he murmured to himself, catching his reflection in the toaster's chrome surface. His dark hair stuck up at odd angles, and 3 days of stubble couldn't quite hide the sharp angles of his face angles that had become more pronounced as meals became smaller and stress became larger. By 6:30, he was bundling Lily into her winter coat, a hand-me-down from the church donation box that was only slightly too big. She chattered excitedly about the snow that had fallen overnight, her breath visible in small puffs as they stepped outside. "Can we build a snowman when you get home, Daddy?" "We'll see, baby girl." It was his standard response to requests that required time he didn't have and energy he'd spent years ago. But her hopeful smile made him add, "Maybe a small one." Hayes's Auto Repair sat on the corner of Main and 3rd, a squat brick building that had seen better decades. The sign out front was missing 2 letters and hung at a dejected angle, much like Daniel's hopes for the business. Inside the garage was a monument to automotive archaeology parts, from cars that no longer existed, tools that had been old when his father used them, and dreams that had been gathering dust since the economy tanked. "Mr. Hayes." Tommy Kowalski burst through the front door, bringing with him a gust of frigid air and an expression of pure panic. Tommy was 19, all elbows and enthusiasm, working for Daniel in exchange for learning the trade and whatever spare change the register could afford. "What's got you looking like you've seen a ghost, kid?" "It's the Morrison account, sir. They're pulling their fleet maintenance contract." Daniel felt his stomach drop. Morrison Trucking represented 30% of his monthly income, the difference between keeping the lights on and closing the doors forever. "Did they say why?" Tommy shifted uncomfortably. They're moving their business to Patterson's shop over in Cedar Falls. Said they needed somewhere more reliable. The word hit Daniel like a physical blow. Reliable. He'd built his reputation on being reliable, on fixing what others couldn't, on being there when people needed him most. But reputation didn't pay for replacement parts when the supply companies demanded cash up front. Reputation didn't keep the heat on when the utility bills piled up like accusations. Well, Daniel said, forcing his voice to remain steady, I guess we better make sure every other customer knows they can count on us then. The morning crawled by with agonizing slowness. A few locals brought in minor repairs, a starter here, a brake job there, but nothing that would fill the Morrison-sized hole in his finances. By noon, Daniel found himself staring at the books, trying to make the numbers bend to his will through sheer force of desperation. The phone rang. Hayes's Auto. Daniel, it's Carol from Millbrook Elementary. His blood turned to ice. Carol only called when something was wrong with Lily. Is she hurt? No, nothing like that. But her teacher is concerned. Lily's been quiet lately, more than usual. And today she told Miss Patterson that she couldn't go on the field trip next week because you don't have enough money for the bus fare. Daniel closed his eyes. The field trip was $15, that might as well have been $15,000. I'll talk to her. Daniel, we have programs. I'll handle it. His pride was one of the few things he had left, and he guarded it fiercely even when it hurt. After hanging up, he sat in the quiet garage surrounded by the ghosts of better times. On the wall hung a photo from the shop's grand opening 15 years ago, him and Sarah cutting a ribbon, both of them grinning like they owned the world. Her cancer diagnosis came 5 years later, and the medical bills that followed ate through their savings like acid through metal. The bell above the door chimed, pulling him from his reverie. Excuse me, are you open? The voice was different, refined with the kind of polish that spoke of education and opportunities. Daniel looked up to see a woman in the doorway, and for a moment he forgot how to breathe. She was probably in her early 30s with auburn hair that caught the weak December sunlight streaming through the windows. Her coat was obviously expensive wool, with clean lines that suggested it had never seen the inside of a discount store. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold green as spring grass, but carrying a weight that seemed at odds with her elegant appearance. Yes, ma'am. What can I do for you? I'm hoping you can help me. My car broke down about a mile up the highway, and my phone isn't getting service. The tow truck driver said you were the closest shop. Daniel was already reaching for his keys. What kind of trouble are you having? It just died. I was driving along and suddenly nothing. The engine won't turn over, the lights won't come on, it's like the whole car just gave up. Sounds like it could be the battery or the alternator. I'll follow you out there and take a look. As they walked to his tow truck, a 1995 Ford that had more rust than paint, she seemed to take in the garage with curious eyes. How long have you been in business? 15 years this month. My father started it, actually. I took over when he retired. It wasn't entirely true. His father had started the shop, but Daniel had been forced to take over when the old man's drinking finally caught up with him. Some stories were too complicated for strangers. The drive to her car was short, but the December wind made it feel endless. When they arrived, Daniel let out a low whistle. The vehicle sitting on the shoulder was a silver Porsche 911, probably worth more than he made in 3 years. Nice car, he said, trying to keep the awe out of his voice. It was a gift, she replied, but her tone suggested it wasn't a particularly happy memory. Daniel popped the hood and immediately spotted the problem. Your alternator belt snapped. Probably happened when the temperature dropped last night. The cold can make rubber brittle. Is it expensive to fix? He could have quoted her the premium rate what most shops would charge for a car like this. Instead, he found himself saying, about $60 for the part, maybe $40 for labor. I can have you back on the road in an hour. Something flickered across her face, surprise maybe, or relief. That's very reasonable. Most places would charge much more for a Porsche. A car's a car. They all need the same basic things to run. As he worked, she stood nearby, not hovering like some customers did, but close enough that he caught hints of her perfume, something subtle and expensive that reminded him of Sarah's favorite flowers. You don't wear gloves, she observed. Hard to feel what you're doing with gloves on. Sometimes you have to trust your hands more than your eyes. That's an interesting philosophy. Not philosophy, just necessity. When he finished, the Porsche purred to life like a contented cat. The woman he realized he didn't even know her name smiled for the first time since he'd met her, and the transformation was startling. The weight in her eyes didn't disappear, but it seemed to lift slightly. Thank you, she said, reaching for her purse. I was starting to think I'd be stranded here all day. No problem. That'll be $85. She handed him a $100 bill, crisp and new, unlike the wrinkled singles and fives that usually found their way into his till. Keep the change. Ma'am, that's not necessary. Please. You've been incredibly kind, and She paused, seeming to struggle with something. I know what it's like when every dollar matters. Something in her voice suggested she knew exactly what it was like despite the expensive car and designer clothes. I'm Isabella, she said suddenly. Isabella Grant. Daniel Hayes. And thank you. Is this your only location? The question seemed odd, but he nodded. Just me and one part-time helper. We're not much, but we do good work. I can see that. She looked around at the modest shop, taking in the organized chaos of a working garage. Do you ever work on European cars? I work on whatever needs fixing. German, Italian, Japanese, and engine's an engine for the most part. Good to know. She hesitated at her car door. Daniel, can I ask you something? Sure. Do you believe that everything happens for a reason? The question caught him off guard. I'm not sure. Why? No reason. Just something I've been thinking about lately. She slid into the driver's seat, then rolled down the window. Thank you again. You've been a lifesaver. As the Porsche disappeared down the highway, Daniel stood in the cold, watching until the taillights vanished around a bend. Something about the encounter felt significant, though he couldn't put his finger on what. Maybe it was the way she'd looked at him, not through him like so many people did these days, but at him like she actually saw who he was beneath the grease-stained coveralls and tired eyes. By the time he got back to the shop, Tommy was bouncing with excitement. Dude, was that a Porsche 911 Turbo? Do you know how much those cost? More than we'll ever see, Daniel replied, but without his usual bitterness. Something about Isabella Grant had left him feeling oddly hopeful, though he couldn't explain why. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly. A few more customers trickled in, nothing major, but enough to keep his hands busy and his mind occupied. As closing time approached, he found himself thinking about Lily's field trip, about the Morrison account, about the dozen small disasters that seemed to multiply like rabbits every time he wasn't looking. At 6 p.m., he locked up the shop and drove to pick up Lily from the after-school program at the community center. She ran to him the moment she saw him, her backpack bouncing against her small frame. Daddy, I drew you a picture. She thrust a piece of construction paper at him, a crayon drawing of a man in blue coveralls standing next to a car with a little girl holding his hand. Above them, she'd drawn a yellow sun with an enormous smile. It's beautiful, sweetheart. Is that us? Uh-huh. And that's your garage, and that's your tow truck, and that's the sun smiling because we're happy. Daniel felt his throat tighten. We are happy, aren't we? Most of the time. Except when you make that worried face. What worried face? Lily scrunched up her features in an exaggerated frown, and despite everything, Daniel laughed. I don't look like that. You do too, especially when you're looking at those papers with all the numbers. Smart kid. Too smart sometimes. They drove home through the early December darkness, Lily chattering about her day while Daniel half listened, his mind still wandering to green eyes and expensive perfume. As they climbed the stairs to their apartment, Mrs. Henderson's door opened a crack. Evening, Daniel. Lily. Evening, Mrs. H. How's Felix doing? Felix was the crying cat, a ginger tabby who'd belonged to Mrs. Henderson's late husband. Better, actually. I think he was just lonely. Sometimes when you lose someone important, it takes a while to remember how to be okay again. Daniel met her eyes, understanding passing between them. Mrs. Henderson had lost her husband of 47 years 6 months ago. I know what you mean. I made too much soup again, she said, which was her way of offering help without making it sound like charity. Chicken and dumplings, Lily's favorite. That's very kind of you. As they settled in for the evening, Lily doing homework at the kitchen table while Daniel heated the soup, his phone rang. Unknown number. Hello. Mr. Hayes. This is Patricia Wynn from Orion Motors in Chicago. I'm calling because you were recommended to us for a consulting position. Daniel nearly dropped the phone. Orion Motors was one of the biggest automotive companies in the Midwest. I'm sorry, I think there's been a mistake. I'm just a small-town mechanic. No mistake, Mr. Hayes. Someone with significant influence spoke very highly of your expertise and integrity. Would you be available for an interview next week? His mind raced. Can I ask who recommended me? I'm afraid I can't disclose that information, but I can tell you they hold considerable sway with our board of directors. Daniel looked across the kitchen at Lily, who was bent over her math homework, her tongue poking out in concentration. One interview couldn't hurt, could it? What kind of position are we talking about? Senior technical consultant. The salary range starts at $120,000 annually, plus benefits. The number hit him like a physical blow. More money than he'd made in the last 3 years combined. Yes, I'd be interested in an interview. After he hung up, Daniel stood in his tiny kitchen trying to process what had just happened. Lily looked up from her homework. Was that about a job, Daddy? Maybe, sweetheart. Maybe. Is it a good job? Daniel thought about the woman with green eyes who'd asked if he believed everything happened for a reason. I don't know yet. But maybe it could be. That night after Lily was asleep, Daniel sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the want ads spread before him. But instead of scanning for opportunities, he found himself staring out the window at the snow-covered street, thinking about chance encounters and mysterious phone calls, and the way some moments felt heavy with possibility. Somewhere in Chicago, a woman named Isabella Grant was staring out a different window at a different view, but thinking remarkably similar thoughts. Neither of them could have imagined that their brief encounter on a frozen highway was the first domino in a chain of events that would change everything they thought they knew about love loss and the courage to begin again. But that's the thing about destiny, it rarely announces itself with fanfare. More often it arrives disguised as an ordinary Tuesday, wearing coveralls and carrying a toolbox ready to fix more than just broken engines. In the morning, Daniel would call Patricia Wynn back and schedule his interview. He would buy Lily a new dress for the field trip and tell her they were going on an adventure. He would lock up the garage and drive toward Chicago with hope riding shotgun and fear whispering warnings from the back seat. But tonight he simply sat in the quiet darkness, allowing himself to believe for the first time in years that maybe, just maybe, tomorrow could be different than today. The Chicago skyline emerged through the morning mist, like a promise Daniel wasn't sure he was ready to keep. 3 days had passed since the phone call from Patricia Wynne, and now here he was driving his battered pickup truck through streets lined with glass towers that seemed to mock his small-town existence. Lily sat beside him, her face pressed against the passenger window, eyes wide with wonder. "Daddy, the buildings are so tall. Do people really work up there in the clouds?" "Some of them do, sweetheart." Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel as he navigated the unfamiliar traffic. Every car around them seemed newer, shinier, more expensive than anything he'd ever owned. "Are you nervous?" The question caught him off guard, though it shouldn't have. Lily had always been able to read him like one of her picture books. "A little," he admitted. "Sometimes when something seems too good to be true, it usually is. But sometimes it's just good, right? Like when Mrs. Henderson makes extra soup, or when Tommy brings me those little chocolates from his mom's store." Daniel smiled despite his anxiety. "You're right, baby girl. Sometimes things are just good." The Orion Motors headquarters occupied an entire city block, its facade a masterpiece of steel and glass that reflected the morning sun like a beacon. Daniel pulled into the visitor parking area, his truck looking decidedly out of place among the Mercedes and BMWs that populated the lot. "I still don't understand why I couldn't come to the interview with you," Lily said, unbuckling her seatbelt. "Because interviews are boring grown-up stuff. You'll have much more fun at the Children's Museum, and Mrs. Patterson from school will be there to keep an eye on you." They'd arranged for Lily to spend the day with a group from the school's holiday program, one of the few perks Daniel felt comfortable accepting. The $15 admission fee had been waived for families demonstrating financial need, a category that definitely included the Hayes household. After dropping Lily off at the museum, Daniel returned to Orion Motors with 20 minutes to spare. The lobby was a cathedral of marble and chrome with abstract sculptures that probably cost more than his annual income. He approached the reception desk, where a young woman with perfect makeup and a practiced smile greeted him. "Daniel Hayes to see Patricia Wynne." "Of course, Mr. Hayes. Ms. Wynne is expecting you. Please take the express elevator to the 32nd floor." The elevator ride felt like ascending to another planet. Through the glass walls, Chicago spread out below him in a tapestry of steel and ambition. When the doors opened, he stepped into a reception area that screamed corporate success, leather furniture, original artwork, and a view that stretched to the horizon. "Mr. Hayes." A woman in her 50s approached, extending a manicured hand. "I'm Patricia Wynne, Director of Human Resources. Thank you for making the trip." "Thank you for the opportunity, Ms. Wynne. Though I have to admit I'm still not entirely sure why I'm here." Patricia smiled. "Let's discuss that, shall we? But first there's someone who'd like to meet you." She led him down a hallway lined with photographs of vintage automobiles and company milestones. At the end of the corridor, double doors opened into a conference room, where several people sat around a polished table. But Daniel's attention was immediately drawn to the woman sitting at the far end. Isabella Grant looked up as he entered, and their eyes met across the room. She wore a navy business suit that was both professional and elegant, her auburn hair pulled back in a style that emphasized the classical lines of her face. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "Ms. Grant," Daniel said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "I should have guessed." "Hello, Daniel. Please sit down." Patricia looked between them with obvious curiosity. "You two know each other?" "Mr. Hayes helped me with a car problem recently," Isabella said smoothly. "It was his professionalism and expertise that prompted me to recommend him for this position." Daniel took the seat across from Isabella, acutely aware of the other faces around the table, executives in expensive suits who looked like they'd never had grease under their fingernails. "This is Thomas Cole, our Vice President of Operations," Patricia continued with the introductions. "Jennifer Martinez, our Chief Technology Officer, and Robert Steinberg, our Senior Design Engineer." Thomas Cole was younger than Daniel had expected, probably early 40s, with the kind of confident demeanor that came from never having to worry about rent money. He studied Daniel with undisguised skepticism. "So, you're the miracle mechanic we've heard so much about," Thomas said, his tone suggesting he found the whole situation amusing. "Tell me, Mr. Hayes, what makes you think you're qualified to consult for a company like Orion Motors?" The question was clearly designed to intimidate, but Daniel had dealt with condescending customers before. "I'm not sure I am qualified, Mr. Cole, but I've been fixing cars for 20 years, and I've learned that the principles are the same whether you're working on a rusted-out pickup or a $1 million prototype. Engines need fuel, air, and spark. Everything else is just decoration." Jennifer Martinez leaned forward. "That's an interesting perspective. But surely you understand that modern automotive technology involves complex computer systems, advanced materials, manufacturing processes that go far beyond basic mechanical repair." "You're absolutely right," Daniel said. "I don't know much about computer programming or advanced manufacturing, but I know how things break, and more importantly, I know how to fix them when everyone else has given up. Sometimes the solution isn't more technology. Sometimes it's understanding why the technology failed in the first place." Isabella had remained quiet during this exchange, but Daniel could feel her watching him. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight that made the others pay attention. "Gentlemen, ladies, I think we're approaching this from the wrong angle. We didn't bring Mr. Hayes here to prove he belongs in our world. We brought him here because he sees things differently than we do. In my experience, that kind of perspective is invaluable." Thomas Cole's expression suggested he disagreed. "With all due respect, Ms. Grant, this company has built its reputation on cutting-edge innovation and precision engineering. I'm not sure how a small-town mechanic fits into that equation." "Perhaps," Isabella said, her voice cooling several degrees, "you'd like to explain that to the board of directors when they ask why we're behind schedule on the Meridian project." The room fell silent. Daniel didn't understand the reference, but he could feel the tension crackle like electricity between Isabella and Thomas. Robert Steinberg cleared his throat. "The Meridian is our flagship electric vehicle platform. We've been having some technical difficulties." "What kind of difficulties?" Daniel asked. The executives exchanged glances. Finally, Jennifer Martinez spoke. "Battery thermal management issues. The cooling system keeps failing during extended high-performance operation. We've tried 17 different configurations, and none of them work consistently." "Show him," Isabella said quietly. Patricia led the group to an elevator that descended to the company's testing facility. The space was enormous, a high-tech playground filled with vehicle prototypes, diagnostic equipment, and enough computing power to run a small city. In the center of the floor sat a sleek electric sedan that looked like it had been designed by artists rather than engineers. "The Meridian," Robert said with obvious pride. 0 to 60 in 2.8 seconds, 400-mile range luxury appointments throughout. It should be revolutionary." "But," Daniel prompted, "but the thermal management system can't handle sustained performance. After 15 minutes of aggressive driving, the battery overheats and the car goes into safety mode. We've spent 18 months and $40 million trying to solve this problem." When Daniel walked around the vehicle, his trained eye taking in details that the others might miss. The sleek bodywork was beautiful, but beauty didn't move cars down the highway. "Can I look under the hood?" Thomas Cole snorted. It's electric. There is no hood in the traditional sense. There's always a hood, Mr. Cole. It just might not be where you expect it. Isabella gestured to a technician who opened the front compartment to reveal the vehicle's electrical systems. Daniel studied the layout, noting the positioning of components, the routing of cables, the relationship between the cooling system and the battery pack. The problem isn't the cooling system, he said after several minutes. It's the airflow. Impossible, Robert protested. We've run extensive computational fluid dynamics simulations. The aerodynamics are optimal. For straight-line speed, maybe. But what happens when you're driving in stop-and-go traffic, or up a steep grade, or when it's 90 degrees outside and the air conditioning is running? Daniel pointed to a series of vents near the front of the vehicle. These are designed to channel air through the cooling system when the car is moving at highway speeds. But electric cars spend most of their time in city driving low speeds, frequent stops, heavy electrical loads. Your cooling system is starving for airflow when it needs it most. The room was quiet, except for the hum of diagnostic equipment. Finally, Jennifer Martinez spoke. The simulations didn't account for real-world driving conditions. We optimized for performance metrics, not practical usage. So how do we fix it? Isabella asked. Daniel studied the vehicle again, his mind working through possibilities. You need active cooling fans that work independently of vehicle speed. And you need to redesign the air intake system to capture airflow even when the car is stationary. It's not elegant, but it'll work. Thomas Cole shook his head. That would require significant design changes. Months of additional development retooling the manufacturing line. Or, Daniel interrupted, you could add a simple auxiliary cooling system. Mount small electric fans behind the existing vents controlled by battery temperature sensors. When the system starts to overheat, the fans kick in. Low-tech solution to a high-tech problem. The executives looked at each other with expressions ranging from skepticism to intrigue. Isabella stepped closer to Daniel. Would that actually work? Only one way to find out. 2 hours later, they'd jury-rigged a prototype cooling system using off-the-shelf computer fans and a temperature controller Daniel had sketched on a napkin. The modification looked crude compared to the vehicle's sophisticated engineering, but when they fired up the Meridian for a test drive, the results were undeniable. Battery temperature is holding steady, Jennifer reported from the passenger seat as Robert pushed the car through an aggressive testing routine, even after 25 minutes of hard acceleration. In the observation room, Thomas Cole stared at the telemetry data with an expression of disbelief. This is impossible. We've had our best engineers working on this problem for over a year. Sometimes, Isabella said quietly, the best solution is also the simplest one. When the test concluded, the room buzzed with excited conversation. Engineers huddled around laptops, already working on ways to integrate Daniel's solution into the production design. But Daniel found himself standing apart from the celebration, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened. "Congratulations," Isabella said, appearing at his side. "You just saved Orion Motors about 6 months of development time and probably $20 million. I just added some fans. You solved a problem that our entire engineering department couldn't crack. That's worth more than you know." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the technicians swarm over the Meridian, like excited children with a new toy. "Why?" Daniel asked finally. "Why what? Why did you really recommend me for this job? You could have gotten your car fixed anywhere. You could have had your people call any consultant in the industry. Why me?" Isabella was quiet for a long moment, her green eyes focused on something beyond the testing facility. "Because," she said finally, "when you fixed my car, you didn't try to impress me or overcharge me or treat me differently because of what I was driving. You just helped, And I've been around this industry long enough to know that kind of integrity is rarer than you might think. There's more to it than that. She turned to look at him directly. Yes, there is. But not here. Not now. Before Daniel could respond, Patricia Wynne approached with a tablet in her hands. Mr. Hayes, I'd like to discuss the terms of your consulting agreement. Based on what we've seen today, I think we can be quite generous. The numbers on the screen made Daniel's head spin. The consulting fee alone was more than he made in 6 months at the garage. There were provisions for travel accommodation, a technology allowance, and performance bonuses that could double his compensation. This is extremely generous, he managed. It's what you're worth, Isabella said firmly. What your expertise is worth to this company. I'd need to make arrangements for my business, and my daughter, I can't leave her alone. We're prepared to be flexible with scheduling, Patricia assured him. This doesn't have to be a full-time position. We're thinking 3 days a week initially, with the possibility of remote consultation for routine matters. Daniel felt like he was standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down at a life he'd never imagined possible. The smart thing, the safe thing would be to ask for time to think it over, but safety had never gotten him anywhere. When would you want me to start? Next Monday, Patricia said. If that works for you. It works. As the meeting broke up and people began filing out of the facility, Isabella lingered behind. Daniel, could I speak with you privately for a moment? They walked to a quiet corner of the testing floor, away from the bustle of engineers and technicians. I want you to know that this job offer is legitimate, she said. You earned it with your skills and your insights. But I also want to be transparent with you about something. Go ahead. I'm not just a consultant to Orion Motors. I'm the majority shareholder. This company belongs to me. Daniel stared at her, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. You're Isabella Grant. Grant Industries. Among other things, yes. Grant Industries was one of the largest private investment firms in the country, with holdings in everything from technology to real estate to automotive manufacturing. Isabella Grant wasn't just wealthy, she was one of the most powerful businesswomen in America. So when you asked if I believed everything happened for a reason, I was wondering the same thing you are now. What are the odds that I would break down on a random highway and end up being helped by exactly the person we needed to solve our biggest technical challenge? Daniel felt overwhelmed by the implications. This changes things. Does it? You're still the same man who stopped to help a stranger. I'm still the woman whose car you fixed. The only difference is now you know who I really am. The difference is that now I know this isn't real. This job, this opportunity, it's charity. You're trying to help me because you feel sorry for me. Isabella's expression hardened. Don't insult my intelligence, Daniel, and don't insult yours. I didn't manufacture the Meridian's cooling problem just to give you something to fix. I didn't script the solution you came up with in 5 minutes that our engineers couldn't find in 18 months. This isn't charity, it's business. Then why do I feel like I'm being rescued? Because maybe you are, and maybe I am too. The admission hung between them like a confession. For a moment, Daniel glimpsed something vulnerable in Isabella's eyes, a loneliness that all the money and power in the world couldn't touch. I should go pick up my daughter, he said finally. Of course. Patricia will have all the paperwork ready for you to sign on Monday. They walked toward the elevator in silence, but as the doors opened, Isabella touched his arm. Daniel, for what it's worth, I think your daughter is lucky to have you. What makes you say that? Because you stopped to help a stranger even when you had every reason to keep driving. That's the kind of father I wish I'd had. The elevator carried them up in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. When they reached the lobby, Daniel hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why automotive? With all your money and influence, you could have invested in anything. Why cars?" Isabella smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. "Because cars represent freedom. The ability to go anywhere, be anyone, start over whenever you need to. I've always been fascinated by that possibility." "And have you started over, I mean?" "I'm working on it." Daniel drove back to the Children's Museum with his mind reeling. In the space of one morning, his entire world had been turned upside down. The consulting position would solve his immediate financial problems, and then some. Lily could have the field trip, the new clothes, the bicycle she'd been wanting for Christmas. He could pay off the garage's debts, maybe even expand the business. But beneath the relief was something that felt suspiciously like guilt. He'd built his identity on being self-sufficient, on solving his own problems through hard work and determination. Accepting help, even help he'd earned, felt like admitting defeat. Lily was waiting for him in the museum lobby, practically bouncing with excitement. "Daddy, they had real dinosaur bones, and a room where you could make lightning, and the lady said some of the rockets were big enough to live inside. Sounds like you had quite an adventure." "I did. How was your job meeting?" "Did you wear a tie?" Daniel looked down at his best dress shirt, the one without any stains and his only pair of khakis. "No tie, sweetheart, but it went well." "Does that mean you got the job?" "It means I might work there sometimes, a few days a week." "Will we move to Chicago?" "No, baby girl. We'll stay right where we are. I'll just drive up here when they need me." As they drove back toward Millbrook, Lily chattered about her museum adventure while Daniel tried to process everything that had happened. By the time they reached the familiar streets of their small town, he'd almost convinced himself that the entire day had been a dream. But the business card in his shirt pocket was real enough. Patricia Wynn, Director of Human Resources, Orion Motors, and written on the back in elegant handwriting, "Thank you for seeing what others missed. IG." That evening, after Lily was asleep, Daniel sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a calculator, working through the numbers for what felt like the 100th time. The consulting fee would cover his rent for 6 months. The performance bonuses could pay off the garage's outstanding debts. For the first time in years, he could see a path forward that didn't involve choosing between paying the electric bill and buying groceries. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "I hope you don't regret saying yes. Isabella." He stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "I hope you don't regret asking." Her response came quickly. "Too late for both of us now." Daniel set the phone aside and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered street where he'd lived his entire adult life. Tomorrow he would tell Tommy about the consulting job, would make arrangements for someone to cover the garage 3 days a week. He would buy Lily that bicycle and maybe take her somewhere special for dinner, somewhere with cloth napkins and waiters who didn't know their names. But tonight he stood in his small kitchen and allowed himself to imagine what it might feel like to build something bigger than survival. To create rather than just repair. To be valued for what he could contribute rather than pitied for what he lacked. Somewhere across the city, Isabella Grant stood in her penthouse office looking out at the Chicago skyline. The Meridian project was back on track, the board would be pleased, and the company's stock price would likely jump when news of the breakthrough leaked. By any measure, it had been a successful day. But success, she'd learned, was a poor substitute for connection. And for the first time in years, she'd met someone who saw her as a person rather than a net worth statement. Someone who stopped to help strangers, not because it was good business, but because it was simply the right thing to do. She thought about Daniel's daughter, the way his face had softened when he mentioned her, the careful way he'd calculated what he could afford, before committing to anything. She thought about the photo on his desk at the garage, a woman with kind eyes and a smile that suggested she'd known how to be happy. Isabella had never known that particular kind of happiness. Her childhood had been filled with boarding schools and business trips with parents who measured love in stock options and trust funds. She'd learned early that money could buy almost anything except the things that mattered most. But maybe she thought, as she watched the city lights twinkle like earthbound stars, it was never too late to learn what those things were. The Monday morning drive to Chicago felt different this time. Daniel's hands were steadier on the wheel. His truck freshly washed, despite the December cold, and Lily sat beside him humming a tune she'd learned at school. The consulting contract lay signed and sealed in his briefcase, a leather case Isabella had insisted he needed purchased with his first advance payment. "Will you see the pretty lady again today?" Lily asked, pressing her nose against the window as they entered the city limits. "Which pretty lady?" "The one who came to the garage last week." Daniel's pulse quickened. Isabella had visited Hayes's auto repair 3 days after their meeting at Orion Motors, appearing in the doorway, like something from a dream. She'd brought coffee, real coffee, not the bitter brew he was used to, and a basket of pastries that had made Tommy's eyes widen with wonder. "Maybe," Daniel said carefully. "Why do you ask?" "Because she looked at you the way Mommy used to, like you were the most important person in the whole world." The observation hit Daniel like a physical blow. Sarah had looked at him that way, especially in the early days when they'd believed love could conquer anything. Before the cancer, before the bills, before the weight of keeping everything together had worn them both down to shadows of who they'd once been. "It's not like that, sweetheart. Ms. Grant is just helping Daddy with work." "Okay," Lily said, in that tone children used when they knew adults were lying, but were too polite to say so. At Orion Motors, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. The Meridian project had moved into accelerated testing, and Daniel's cooling system modification had become the foundation for a complete thermal management redesign. Engineers who had initially viewed him with skepticism now sought his opinion on everything from component placement to manufacturing tolerances. "Daniel," Jennifer Martinez waved him over to a bank of computer monitors displaying real-time telemetry from the test track. "We've been running the modified Meridian for 48 hours straight. Battery temperature has remained stable throughout every scenario we could imagine." "What about extreme weather testing?" "That's next on the list. We're shipping 2 prototypes to Arizona and Minnesota for climate validation. Thomas wants to see how the system performs in both desert heat and Arctic cold." The mention of Thomas Cole made Daniel's stomach tighten. The VP of Operations had made his displeasure clear during every interaction, his polite professional demeanor barely masking obvious resentment. It was the kind of corporate politics Daniel had hoped to avoid, but he was learning that success at this level came with its own set of complications. "Where is Mr. Cole this morning?" "Emergency board meeting. Something about the Q4 projections and the Meridian launch timeline." Jennifer's expression suggested this wasn't entirely good news. Isabella called it after the weekend reports came in. Daniel had been trying not to think about Isabella over the past week, but her presence seemed to permeate every corner of Orion Motors. Her decisions shaped daily operations, her vision drove long-term strategy, and her approval carried weight that could make or break careers. Yet when she'd visited his garage, she'd seemed almost vulnerable, asking careful questions about his work and listening to his answers with the intensity of someone starving for genuine conversation. The morning passed in a blur of technical consultations and system reviews. Daniel found himself drawn into discussions about manufacturing processes, supply chain logistics, and quality control measures, topics that stretched beyond his mechanical expertise, but somehow felt natural. His years of running a small business, had taught him lessons about efficiency and problem-solving that translated surprisingly well to corporate environments. Around noon, Patricia Wynne appeared at his workstation with an expression that suggested important news. "Daniel, could you join us in conference room A? There's a situation that requires your input." The conference room was packed with nervous-looking executives' laptops displaying charts and graphs that painted an ominous picture. Thomas Cole sat at the head of the table, his jaw tight with frustration, while Isabella stood by the windows with her back to the room. "Ah, our miracle worker arrives," Thomas said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Perhaps you can solve this crisis with another napkin sketch." "Thomas," Isabella's voice cut through the tension like a blade. She turned to face the room, her green eyes flashing with anger. "That's enough. Is it because we've just learned that our biggest competitor, Apex Automotive, is rushing a comparable electric vehicle to market? They're claiming a Q2 launch 6 months ahead of our Meridian timeline." Daniel took a seat at the table, feeling the weight of a dozen expectant stares. "What's their vehicle's performance profile?" Robert Steinberg consulted his tablet. "Similar range and acceleration specs, but they're boasting superior thermal management. No cooling issues under extended performance conditions." "In other words," Thomas continued, "they've solved the same problem we've been struggling with, and they're going to beat us to market because we wasted 18 months chasing our tails." Isabella moved to the table, her heels clicking against the polished floor. "Robert, what do we know about their thermal solution?" "Industrial espionage suggests they're using a liquid cooling system with integrated heat exchangers. Very sophisticated, very expensive. It would add at least $15,000 to the vehicle's manufacturing cost, which means their retail price will be significantly higher than ours," Daniel observed. "Assuming we can actually get to market," Thomas snapped. "Our current timeline has the Meridian launching in Q3 at the earliest. By then, Apex will have captured the early adopter market and established themselves as the premium electric vehicle brand." The room fell silent, except for the hum of air conditioning and the distant sounds of Chicago traffic. Daniel studied the faces around the table, brilliant people whose expertise far exceeded his own, but who seemed paralyzed by the complexity of their situation. "What if we're thinking about this wrong?" he said finally. "How so?" Isabella asked. "Everyone's focused on beating Apex to market with a comparable product. But what if we don't need to compete directly? What if we offer something completely different?" Thomas laughed bitterly, "such as accessibility, reliability, affordability." Daniel stood and moved to the whiteboard, picking up a marker. "Apex is building a luxury vehicle for wealthy early adopters. That's maybe 2% of the car-buying market. What about the other 98%? He began sketching on the board rough diagrams of vehicle platforms and market segments. "The Meridian as currently designed is a beautiful car, but it's trying to compete in a space that's already crowded with luxury options. What if we repositioned it as the first truly practical electric vehicle, not the fastest, not the most luxurious, but the most dependable and affordable?" Jennifer leaned forward. "You're talking about significant design changes. Simplifying the interior, reducing performance specifications." "Exactly. Strip out the expensive bells and whistles that most people don't need. Focus on the fundamentals: reliable transportation that happens to be electric. Market it to families, to commuters, to people who want to do the right thing for the environment without breaking the bank." Robert was already running calculations on his laptop. "If we simplified the interior package and reduced the acceleration specs, we could probably cut manufacturing costs by $20,000 per unit, which would let us retail for $35,000 instead of $60,000. Isabella said, her voice quickening with excitement. That puts us in competition with traditional sedans, not just other luxury electrics. Thomas shook his head. It's a complete strategy shift. We'd have to retool marketing, adjust manufacturing, redesign half the components. All of which takes time we don't have, Daniel interrupted, unless we do it differently. He turned back to the whiteboard, his mind racing through possibilities. What if we don't start from scratch? What if we take the Meridian platform as it exists and create two versions? Keep the luxury model for the premium market, but also develop a simplified variant for mainstream buyers. Use the same basic chassis, the same drivetrain, the same thermal management system. Just change the interior appointments and some of the performance software. The room erupted in discussion. Engineers huddled around laptops, finance people consulted spreadsheets, and marketing executives debated positioning strategies. Through it all, Isabella watched Daniel with an expression he couldn't quite read. It could work, Jennifer said finally. We'd essentially be creating two market segments from one platform. The engineering development would be minimal, mostly software changes and interior modifications. Timeline, Isabella asked. 6 weeks for the simplified variant, assuming we prioritize it above all other projects. Thomas Cole had been conspicuously quiet during the brainstorming session. Now he spoke with deliberate precision. This is exactly the kind of half-baked thinking I was afraid of when we brought in outside consultants. You're proposing that we cannibalize our own premium product by offering a cheaper alternative. It's commercial suicide. Or commercial genius, Isabella replied coolly. Tesla succeeded by moving from luxury to mainstream. Why shouldn't we? Because Tesla built their brand on innovation and exclusivity. We'd be building ours on compromise and corner-cutting. Daniel felt the familiar sting of condescension that he'd experienced throughout his life, the assumption that because he lacked formal education, his ideas were somehow less valid. Mr. Cole, he said quietly, with respect, I've been in the repair business for 20 years. I know what breaks and I know what lasts. Most people don't need a car that goes 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds. They need a car that starts every morning, gets them to work safely, and doesn't cost a fortune to maintain. If we can deliver that with electric technology, we'll own the market. And if we're wrong, we'll have destroyed the Meridian brand before it ever launched. Isabella moved to the window, her silhouette framed against the Chicago skyline. For a long moment, the room was silent, except for the soft clicking of keyboards and the rustle of papers. We're going to do it, she said finally. Both versions, premium and mainstream. Robert, I want preliminary designs for the simplified variant by the end of the week. Jennifer, start working on performance software modifications. Patricia, coordinate with marketing on positioning strategies. And the timeline? Thomas asked, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. 6 weeks for the mainstream variant, as Jennifer suggested. We'll launch both versions simultaneously, premium and accessible electric vehicles from Orion Motors. Let Apex compete with our luxury model while we capture the broader market. Thomas gathered his papers with sharp, angry movements. I want it noted in the record that I strongly object to this strategy. When this fails, and it will fail, I don't want to be held responsible for the consequences. He stalked out of the conference room, leaving behind an atmosphere thick with tension. The other executives began filing out, chattering excitedly about development schedules and market projections. Soon, only Daniel and Isabella remained. That was quite a presentation, she said, moving closer to where he stood by the whiteboard. It was just common sense. Sometimes the best solution isn't the most complicated one. Thomas doesn't see it that way. Daniel erased his sketches from the board, buying time to organize his thoughts. Mr. Cole doesn't like me very much. Thomas doesn't like anyone who threatens his position. He's been VP of operations for 8 years and he's comfortable with the status quo. You represent change and change makes him nervous. Maybe he's right to be nervous. I'm just a small-town mechanic who got lucky. What do I know about corporate strategy or market positioning? Isabella stepped closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume, the same subtle scent he remembered from that first day on the highway. You know what matters to real people. You understand that not everyone can afford a $60,000 car, no matter how revolutionary the technology. That's not luck, Daniel. That's wisdom. Is it, or am I just projecting my own limitations onto the market? What do you mean? Daniel set down the marker and turned to face her fully. I mean that maybe I'm pushing for an affordable version because I know I could never afford the luxury model myself. Maybe this isn't about market strategy. Maybe it's about my own insecurities. Isabella was quiet for a moment, studying his face with those penetrating green eyes. Do you want to know what I see when I look at you, Daniel? I'm not sure. I see someone who stopped to help a stranger on a cold morning, even though he had every reason to keep driving. I see a father who works himself to the bone to provide for his daughter, who measures success not in dollars, but in whether he can afford to send her on a school field trip. I see a man who solved an 18-month engineering problem in 5 minutes because he wasn't blinded by conventional thinking. She moved closer still, and Daniel felt his pulse quicken. Most importantly, I see someone who understands that the best technology in the world is worthless if real people can't access it. That's not insecurity, Daniel. That's empathy. And empathy is exactly what this industry needs. They stood facing each other in the empty conference room, the Chicago skyline stretching endlessly beyond the windows. Daniel felt as though he were standing at another cliff's edge. But this time the drop had nothing to do with career opportunities or financial security. Isabella. He began, then stopped. The words he wanted to say felt too dangerous, too complicated for their professional relationship. Yes. Nothing. I should get back to work. But he didn't move, and neither did she. The air between them crackled with unspoken possibilities, with the electric tension that comes when two people recognize something profound in each other. Daniel, Isabella said softly. Would you like to have dinner with me tonight, I mean? Not business, just dinner. The invitation hung between them like a question mark loaded with implications that went far beyond a simple meal. I don't know if that's a good idea. Why not? Because you're Isabella Grant and I'm nobody special. Because you own this company and I work for you. Because I have a 7-year-old daughter who depends on me to make smart decisions, not romantic ones. Isabella's expression shifted, and for a moment he caught a glimpse of the vulnerability he'd sensed during their first meeting. You're right, of course. It would be inappropriate. I'm sorry for suggesting it. She started toward the door, but Daniel's voice stopped her. I didn't say no. She turned back to him, hope flickering in her eyes like candlelight. You didn't. I said it wasn't a good idea. There's a difference. A significant difference. Daniel found himself smiling despite his better judgment. Probably not. But sometimes the best things in life are the ones that scare us the most. That evening, Daniel stood in front of his bathroom mirror, trying to decide if his one good shirt was appropriate for dinner with a billionaire. Lily sat on the edge of the bathtub, offering fashion advice with the serious demeanor of a professional stylist. The blue one makes your eyes look nice, she said. Mommy always said you had pretty eyes. Did she? Uh-huh. She said they were the color of chocolate milk, and that's why she fell in love with you. Daniel's throat tightened. Sarah had indeed loved his brown eyes, had traced the lines around them with gentle fingers during the quiet moments they'd stolen between hospital visits and insurance forms. "Do you think Mommy would be okay with you having dinner with the pretty lady?" The question caught him off guard. He'd been so focused on his own conflicted feelings that he hadn't considered how this might affect Lily's memories of her mother. "What do you think, sweetheart?" Lily considered this with the gravity that children brought to important questions. "I think Mommy would want you to be happy. And I think she'd like the pretty lady because she helped you with your job and brought us those good cookies." "Isabella. Her name is Isabella." "Isabella," Lily repeated carefully. "That's a princess name." "Maybe it is." Mrs. Henderson had agreed to watch Lily for the evening, appearing at their door with a bag of knitting and strict instructions for bedtime routines. As Daniel prepared to leave, she pulled him aside. "She seems like a nice woman, this Isabella." "How do you never mind?" "Yes, she is. Your Sarah was a wonderful girl, God rest her soul. But she's been gone 3 years now, Daniel. You're allowed to live again." The restaurant Isabella had chosen was elegant without being ostentatious, the kind of place where conversations mattered more than appearances. She was waiting for him at a corner table wearing a simple black dress that somehow made her look more beautiful than any designer gown could have managed. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said, as he sat down. "I wasn't sure either until about 5 minutes ago." They ordered wine, a bottle that probably cost more than Daniel usually spent on groceries in a month, and settled into the kind of conversation that felt both natural and electric. "Tell me about your daughter," Isabella said. "Lily, she's 7, brilliant, and has opinions about everything. She wants to be a veterinarian or an astronaut, depending on the day of the week." "She sounds wonderful." "She is. She's the best thing I've ever done, probably the only thing I've done right in my entire life." Isabella smiled, but there was sadness in it. "You're lucky. I always wanted children, but somehow the timing never seemed right. Career first, then the right relationship, then financial security. There was always something that had to happen before I could even think about starting a family." "It's not too late, isn't it? I'm 34 years old, single, and so consumed with business that I can't remember the last time I had a conversation that wasn't about quarterly projections or market share. Except for tonight. Except for tonight." They talked about everything and nothing. Childhood memories, favorite books, the dreams they'd given up, and the ones they still harbored. Isabella spoke about growing up in boarding schools, about parents who measured love in stock portfolios and trust funds, about learning to navigate corporate boardrooms before she'd learned to navigate her own heart. Daniel found himself sharing stories he hadn't told anyone since Sarah's death, about his father's drinking, and the garage's early struggles about the night Lily was born, and how holding her had felt like holding the entire future in his hands. "You know what I envy most about your life," Isabella said as dessert arrived. "What's that? The authenticity of it. Every decision you make matters in a real, immediate way. When you fix someone's car, they can get to work the next morning. When you hug your daughter, she feels safer. Everything has direct, tangible impact. And your decisions don't. My decisions affect stock prices and quarterly earnings. They make rich people richer or slightly less rich. But when was the last time I did something that actually improved someone's life in a meaningful way?" Daniel thought about this swirling wine in his glass as he considered her words. "You gave me this job. That's going to improve Lily's life in ways you can't even imagine." That was business. Was it? Because it feels like something more. Their eyes met across the table, and Daniel felt the same electric tension that had filled the conference room earlier. But here, in the intimate lighting of the restaurant, It felt both more dangerous and more inevitable. "Daniel," Isabella said quietly, "I need you to know something." "What?" "This isn't just about the job. My interest in you, it goes beyond your professional expertise." "I know. Does that frighten you?" "Terrify me," he admitted, "but not enough to make me run." They finished dinner and walked slowly to the parking garage, neither wanting the evening to end. Standing beside Isabella's Porsche, the same car he'd fixed on that frozen highway, Daniel felt as though his entire life had led to this moment. "I should go," he said. "Lily will be wondering where I am." "Of course, thank you for tonight. I can't remember when I've enjoyed an evening more." "Neither can I." Isabella unlocked her car, then hesitated. "Daniel, what happens now, tomorrow morning? I go back to being your boss, and you go back to being my employee. How do we navigate that?" "Very carefully, I imagine. And this, whatever this is between us." Daniel stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. "I don't know, but I'd like to find out. Even with all the complications, the difference in our backgrounds, the professional relationship, the fact that your life is in Millbrook and mine is scattered across a dozen cities. Especially because of the complications, easy things aren't usually worth having." Isabella smiled, the first truly unguarded expression he'd seen from her all evening. "You realize you're probably going to break my heart, don't you? Only if you break mine first." She laughed, a sound like silver bells in the winter air. "I think we're both in serious trouble." "Probably. But you're willing to risk it." Daniel thought about Lily's innocent question earlier about whether Sarah would approve. He thought about Mrs. Henderson's gentle wisdom about the loneliness that had been his constant companion for 3 years, about the possibility that love might be worth the terror it inspired. "Yes," he said simply, "I'm willing to risk it." Isabella rose on her tiptoes and kissed him softly, a kiss that tasted like wine and possibility, and the promise of everything he'd thought was lost forever. When they parted, Daniel felt as though the world had shifted on its axis, revealing new continents of hope he'd forgotten existed. "Good night, Daniel Hayes." "Good night, Isabella Grant." As he drove home through the quiet streets of suburban Chicago, Daniel's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. But he knew who it was before he looked. "Thank you for taking the risk. Sweet dreams." He typed back quickly, "Thank you for being worth it." The response came immediately. "We're going to figure this out, aren't we?" Daniel smiled as he pulled into his driveway, the porch light Mrs. Henderson had left on for him glowing like a beacon in the darkness. "Yes," he typed, "we are." The following weeks unfolded like pages from a book Daniel had never imagined himself reading. The dual-version Meridian project consumed his days at Orion Motors, while his evenings became a careful dance of stolen moments with Isabella and precious time with Lily. The balance felt precarious, like walking a tightrope between two worlds that seemed determined never to touch. "Daddy, you smell different," Lily announced one morning as Daniel prepared her breakfast. She was perched on the kitchen counter, swinging her legs while he scrambled eggs in their ancient skillet. "Different how? Happy different. Like when Mrs. Henderson bakes cookies or when Tommy brings me those chocolates." She tilted her head, studying him with the unnerving perception that 7-year-olds possessed. "Are you in love with Isabella?" Daniel nearly dropped the spatula. 3 weeks of carefully managed conversations, and his daughter had cut straight to the heart of what he'd been afraid to name. "What makes you ask that?" "Because you get the same look Mommy used to get when she looked at you. All soft and smiley, like you have a secret that makes you happy." The comparison to Sarah hit him like a physical blow, but not in the painful way he'd expected. Instead, it felt like permission, as though his late wife was somehow blessing this impossible situation. It's complicated, sweetheart. Everything grown-ups do is complicated. But yes or no, do you love her? Daniel set down the spatula and turned to face his daughter fully. I think I might. Is that okay with you? Lily considered this with the gravity she brought to all important decisions. Does she make you laugh? Sometimes. Does she like me? She hasn't met you properly yet, but I think she would. Does she know about Mommy? The question pierced deeper than the others. Daniel had told Isabella about Sarah's cancer, about the medical bills, and the long nights in hospital waiting rooms. But they'd never discussed the deeper wounds, the guilt he carried for being relieved when the suffering finally ended, the fear that loving someone new meant betraying the memory of someone irreplaceable. She knows Mommy was special. Good. Because I don't want her to think she can replace Mommy. Nobody can do that. Nobody ever could, baby girl. But maybe there's room in our hearts for someone new, too. Lily nodded solemnly. I think Mommy would like that. She always said hearts aren't like houses. They don't run out of room for people you love. At Orion Motors, the atmosphere crackled with focused intensity. The mainstream Meridian, now dubbed the Meridian Core, was exceeding all projections in preliminary testing. The simplified interior had actually improved the vehicle's appeal, creating clean lines and intuitive controls that felt more contemporary than the luxury version's elaborate displays. Initial market research is off the charts, Jennifer Martinez reported during the morning briefing. Focus groups love the accessibility angle. We're getting responses like, finally an electric car for real people, and this is what Tesla should have built from the beginning. Thomas Cole sat at the far end of the conference table, his expression suggesting he'd swallowed something bitter. The success of Daniel's strategy had only deepened his resentment, creating tension that rippled through every interaction. Market research is one thing, Thomas said coldly. Manufacturing is another. We're pushing production timelines to the absolute limit, cutting corners on quality control, rushing suppliers who weren't prepared for this accelerated schedule. When something goes wrong, and something will go wrong, we'll have created our own disaster. Isabella, who had been reviewing production reports on her tablet, looked up with measured patience. Thomas, what specific quality concerns do you have? I need details, not generalizations. Battery integration is the biggest risk. We're using the same thermal management system in both versions, but the core model has simplified wiring harnesses. If those connections fail under stress, they won't, Daniel interrupted. We've tested them under conditions far more extreme than normal operation. The simplified design is actually more reliable, not less. Thomas turned to face him with undisguised hostility. More reliable according to what standard? Your garage in Millbrook. Your experience fixing pickup trucks and lawnmowers. The room fell silent. Daniel felt the familiar sting of condescension, but this time it was overlaid with something more personal. The knowledge that Thomas viewed him as a threat, not just professionally, but personally as well. According to the data, Daniel replied evenly, fewer connection points, shorter wire runs, standardized components. Every additional complexity increases failure probability. That's not opinion, that's basic engineering. Basic engineering, Thomas repeated mockingly, spoken like someone who learned automotive theory from YouTube videos and auto parts catalogs. Thomas, Isabella's voice cut through the tension like a blade of ice. That's enough. Is it because I think it's time we addressed the elephant in the room? We're betting the company's future on the advice of someone with zero formal engineering education, zero corporate experience, and zero understanding of the stakes involved. And why? Because he fixed your car and charmed his way into... Stop! Isabella stood her hands flat on the conference table. Whatever you're about to say, don't. Thomas smiled, but it was the cold expression of someone who sensed weakness. I'm simply pointing out that personal relationships have no place in business decisions. When this project fails and the preliminary success means nothing, if we can't execute at scale, the board will want to know why we ignored proven expertise in favor of folksy wisdom from Middle America. Daniel felt something cold settle in his stomach. The implication was clear. Thomas knew about his relationship with Isabella, or at least suspected it. In the corporate world, that knowledge was a weapon. The project won't fail, Isabella said quietly, but Daniel could hear the strain in her voice. The Meridian Core is going to revolutionize the electric vehicle market. And if it doesn't? If the rushed timeline leads to quality issues, recalls lawsuits, will your consultant take responsibility for the consequences? All eyes turned to Daniel. He could feel the weight of expectations, the pressure of being the outsider who'd been given access to power beyond his station. Part of him wanted to retreat to acknowledge that Thomas might be right, that he was out of his depth in this world of corporate politics and billion-dollar decisions. Instead, he thought about Lily's field trip money, about Sarah's medical bills, about all the times he'd been told he wasn't qualified, wasn't educated enough, wasn't worthy of consideration. Yes, he said simply. If the Meridian Core fails because of my recommendations, I'll take full responsibility. Daniel, Isabella began, but he held up a hand. It's okay. Mr. Cole is right about one thing. The stakes are enormous, but he's wrong about the outcome. The core will succeed, not despite its simplicity, but because of it. Sometimes the best solution really is the most straightforward one. Thomas leaned back in his chair, his expression suggesting he'd gotten exactly what he wanted. Well then, I guess we'll see who's right in 6 weeks. The meeting dispersed with an undercurrent of unease that seemed to follow Daniel through the rest of his day. Engineers who had previously sought his input now seemed hesitant to approach him, uncertain whether his star was rising or falling. The political implications of his relationship with Isabella were becoming impossible to ignore. That evening they met at a small cafe near the lake, a place Isabella had chosen for its anonymity rather than its ambiance. She looked tired, older somehow, as though the morning's confrontation had drained something vital from her. I'm sorry about Thomas, she said without preamble. His behavior was unacceptable. He wasn't entirely wrong, though, was he, about the personal relationship affecting business decisions? Isabella stirred her coffee with mechanical precision. Do you think it has affected my judgment? I mean, Daniel considered the question carefully. I don't know. I hope not. But I can see how it might look to others. The board is meeting tomorrow. Thomas requested a special session to discuss project management and oversight. He's going to raise concerns about the accelerated timeline. And about me, probably. They sat in silence, watching pedestrians hurry past the cafe windows, each lost in coats and scarves and the private urgencies of their own lives. Daniel felt the familiar weight of being caught between worlds, too successful to return to his old life, too inexperienced to navigate this new one safely. Maybe I should step back, he said finally. Finish the technical consulting, but distance myself from the strategic decisions. Let the project succeed or fail on its own merits. Is that what you want? I want what's best for the company, and for you. Isabella looked up from her coffee, her green eyes bright with unshed tears. And what about what's best for us? The question hung between them like a challenge. Daniel reached across the table to take her hand, feeling the softness of her skin against his calloused palm. I don't know if there can be an us, Isabella. Not in the real world. We're from different planets. Are we? Because when I'm with you, when we're talking about something other than stock prices and market projections, I feel more like myself than I have in years. Is that worth nothing? It's worth everything. But wanting something and being able to have it aren't the same thing. Isabella pulled her hand free and stood abruptly. I need to go. Early meeting tomorrow. Isabella, wait. But she was already moving toward the door, leaving Daniel alone with his coffee and the growing certainty that he was about to lose something precious before he'd even fully understood what it was. The board meeting took place in Orion Motors' executive conference room, a space designed to intimidate with its floor-to-ceiling windows and imposing mahogany table. Daniel wasn't invited to attend, but the results reached him quickly through the corporate grapevine. It was brutal, Jennifer whispered during lunch. Thomas presented a full analysis of project risks, questioned the decision-making process, even raised concerns about conflicts of interest. The board wants a complete review of the Meridian Core timeline. What kind of review? Independent oversight. They're bringing in external consultants to validate the technical specifications and manufacturing schedule. If there are any red flags, the project gets delayed pending further analysis. Daniel felt his stomach drop. An external review would take weeks, possibly months. Even if the consultants ultimately validated the design, the delay would hand the market advantage to Apex Automotive. Everything they'd worked toward would be lost. Where's Isabella? Damage control. She's meeting with individual board members trying to maintain support for the project. That afternoon, Daniel drove to Millbrook earlier than usual, needing the familiar comfort of his garage and the honest simplicity of mechanical problems. Tommy was waiting for him, with an expression of barely contained excitement. Dude, you're not going to believe this Channel 7 wants to do a story about the garage. Something about local success stories and small businesses thriving. They want to interview you tomorrow. Why would they want to interview me? Because word's getting out about your consulting work with Orion Motors. People are calling you the small-town genius who's revolutionizing the auto industry. It's like a fairy tale or something. Daniel felt a surge of panic. Media attention was the last thing he needed, especially with the board review pending. Corporate executives didn't appreciate consultants who courted publicity. Tommy, we need to cancel that interview. What? Why? This is huge for the business, free advertising credibility. It's complicated. Trust me on this. His phone buzzed with a text from Isabella. Need to talk. Can you meet me at the office tonight after hours? Daniel stared at the message, trying to read between the lines. The formal tone suggested bad news, the timing implied secrecy. He typed back quickly. Of course. What time? 8 p.m., Executive Parking Garage East Entrance. The clandestine nature of the meeting sent Daniel's anxiety spiraling. By the time he reached Orion Motors that evening, he'd convinced himself that Isabella was about to end both their professional and personal relationships. She was waiting by her Porsche, still in her business suit, but looking rumpled and exhausted. The confident executive who commanded boardrooms had been replaced by someone who looked vulnerable and uncertain. How bad is it? Daniel asked without preamble. Bad. The board voted to suspend the Meridian Core project pending external review. They want a complete technical audit, manufacturing assessment, and market analysis. Conservative estimate is 8 weeks for the review process. Which means Apex wins. Which means we've lost our window. By the time we get clearance to proceed, they'll have established market dominance. They stood in the empty parking garage, their voices echoing off concrete walls and metal pillars. Daniel felt the weight of failure settling on his shoulders like a familiar coat. I'm sorry, he said. This is my fault. If I hadn't pushed for the dual version strategy, don't. Isabella's voice was sharp. Don't apologize for being right. The core is a brilliant concept that could transform the industry. The board's decision is about fear, not facts. And about us. Isabella was quiet for a long moment, her eyes focused on something beyond the garage's fluorescent lighting. Thomas presented a compelling case that personal relationships had compromised my judgment. He didn't mention you by name, but the implications were clear. So they're questioning your leadership. They're questioning my objectivity, and they're not wrong to do so. The admission hit Daniel like a physical blow. You're having second thoughts. I'm having realistic thoughts. About what it means to run a company, about the responsibilities I have to shareholders and employees, about whether I can afford to make decisions based on what I want, instead of what's best for business. And Daniel leaned against a concrete pillar, feeling the cold seep through his shirt. And what do you want, Isabella? I want to take risks. I want to trust my instincts instead of focus groups. I want to build something meaningful instead of just profitable. She paused, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. I want to wake up next to someone who sees me as a person instead of a net worth statement. Then why does it sound like you're saying goodbye? Isabella moved closer, close enough that he could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the weight of decisions that affected thousands of lives. Because wanting something and being able to have it aren't the same thing. Isn't that what you told me? I was wrong. Where you look around, Daniel, look at where we are meeting in secret, afraid of being seen together, watching a brilliant project die because I couldn't separate my personal feelings from business judgment. This isn't sustainable. Daniel reached for her hands, holding them, despite her attempt to pull away. So we figure out how to make it sustainable. We find a way to be together that doesn't compromise your position or torpedo the company. How? By pretending we're just business associates, by hiding what we feel for each other, by being honest about it, by proving that our relationship makes the company stronger, not weaker. Isabella laughed, but it was a sound devoid of humor. You think corporate boards care about love, Daniel. They care about quarterly returns and shareholder value. Romance is a liability in their world. Then maybe their world is the problem. Maybe it is, but it's the world we're living in. They stood facing each other in the empty garage, the space between them feeling vast, despite their physical proximity. Daniel could feel the moment slipping away, could sense that whatever decision Isabella made tonight would determine the trajectory of both their lives. There's something else, she said finally. The board wants to restructure the consulting arrangement. They're bringing in a team of external engineers to oversee the project. Your role would be diminished, eliminated. Effectively, yes. Daniel nodded slowly, unsurprised but still stung by the finality of it. And us, what happens to us when I'm no longer part of the company? Isabella's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. I don't know. How do we build a relationship when our lives are so different? When I travel constantly? When your daughter needs stability? When every decision I make affects thousands of people? The same way anyone builds a relationship. One day at a time. One choice at a time. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. The complicated part is having the courage to try. Isabella pulled her hands free and walked to her car, her heels clicking against the concrete floor. For a moment, Daniel thought she was leaving without another word. Instead, she turned back to face him. I love you, she said simply. I need you to know that. Whatever happens next, whatever decisions I have to make for the company, it's not because I don't love you. Then don't make those decisions. choose us instead. I can't. I have responsibilities. To whom? To a board of directors who've never created anything. To shareholders who only care about profit margins. What about your responsibility to yourself? To the possibility of being happy? It's not that easy, Daniel. Why not? Why can't it be that easy? Isabella stood by her car, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. Because I've never been brave enough to choose love over security. Because I don't know how to be the kind of person who takes risks for the right reasons instead of the profitable ones. Daniel walked toward her slowly, giving her the chance to retreat if she wanted to. When she didn't move, he cupped her face in his hands, brushing away tears with gentle thumbs. Then learn. We'll learn together. And if I destroy everything in the process, the company, my reputation, your career, then we'll rebuild together. Isabella closed her eyes, leaning into his touch like someone accepting grace she didn't deserve. I'm scared, Daniel. I'm terrified of making the wrong choice. So am I. But I'm more terrified of not making any choice at all. They kissed in the empty parking garage, surrounded by concrete and fluorescent lights and the echoes of their own voices. It wasn't romantic in any conventional sense, but it felt like a promise, fragile and uncertain, but real enough to build a future on. When they parted, Isabella rested her forehead against his, her breathing still unsteady. The board meets again on Friday. They'll finalize the restructuring plan and announce the external review. And you'll tell them what? I don't know yet, but I know I can't keep living two separate lives, the corporate executive and the woman who wants something more. It's time to choose. Which will you choose? Isabella smiled through her tears, the first genuine expression of hope he'd seen from her all evening. I'll choose the one that scares me more. Because you're right. The complicated part is having the courage to try. They separated reluctantly, each heading to their own car and their own uncertain future. As Daniel drove home through the quiet suburbs, he thought about courage and choice, about the difference between wanting something and fighting for it. At home, Lily was already asleep, but Mrs. Henderson was waiting with a cup of tea and the patient expression of someone who understood more than she let on. How did it go, dear? I'm not sure. Ask me again on Friday. And the job? Probably ending. But maybe that's not the worst thing. Mrs. Henderson patted his shoulder with the gentle wisdom of someone who'd weathered her own storms. Sometimes the best opportunities come disguised as the worst disasters. Your Sarah used to say that, said it helped her through the difficult times. Did she? Oh yes. Every ending is also a beginning, she'd say. The trick is having the faith to look for it. Daniel smiled, feeling Sarah's presence in the words like a blessing. I think I'm starting to understand what she meant. Good. Because I have a feeling you're going to need that understanding very soon. As Daniel prepared for bed, he found himself thinking not about what he might lose, but about what he might gain. The corporate consulting position had been a lifeline, but it had also been a compromise, a way of solving his financial problems without addressing the deeper question of what he wanted to build with his life. Now facing the possibility of losing both the job and Isabella, he realized that maybe the real choice wasn't between security and risk. Maybe it was between settling for what seemed possible and fighting for what seemed impossible. His phone buzzed with one final text from Isabella. Thank you for reminding me what courage looks like. Whatever happens Friday, I won't forget that. Daniel typed back, thank you for being worth the risk. All of it. The response came quickly. See you on the other side. As he drifted off to sleep, Daniel found himself thinking about bridges, not the kind that spanned rivers or valleys, but the kind that connected hearts across impossible distances. Sometimes he realized the most important bridges were the ones you built while standing in midair, with nothing but faith and hope to hold them up. Friday morning arrived with the weight of destiny, heavy clouds gathering over Chicago, like witnesses to a reckoning years in the making. Daniel stood in his garage in Millbrook, staring at the coffee pot as it gurgled to life his mind, 3 hours away in a boardroom, where Isabella would choose between everything she'd built and everything she'd discovered she wanted. "You look like you're going to throw up," Lily observed from the kitchen table where she was methodically arranging her cereal into perfect rows. "Thanks for the confidence boost, sweetheart." "Are you nervous about Isabella's big meeting?" Daniel turned to study his daughter once again, amazed by her ability to cut through adult complications to the heart of things. "How do you know about the meeting?" "Because you've been checking your phone every 30 seconds for 3 days, and you made that worried face again yesterday when you thought I wasn't looking." "What worried face?" Lily scrunched her features into an exaggerated frown, and despite his anxiety, Daniel laughed. "I don't look like that." "You do too. But it's okay, Daddy. Sometimes grown-ups have to make scary decisions. Mommy told me that once." "Did she? When?" "When she was really sick. She said sometimes you have to choose between what's safe and what's right, and the right choice is usually the scarier one." Daniel felt his throat tighten. Sarah had indeed faced impossible choices during her illness experimental treatments that might extend her life or hasten her death, the decision to stop fighting and focus on quality time instead of quantity. She'd chosen courage every time, even when it terrified her. "Your mom was very wise." "I know. That's why I think Isabella is going to make the right choice too. She reminds me of Mommy in some ways." "How so?" Lily considered this with the gravity she brought to all important observations. "She looks at you like you're the most important person in the room, and she has sad eyes that get happy when she smiles. Mommy was like that too, especially near the end." The insight pierced deeper than Daniel had expected. He'd never consciously noticed the sadness in Isabella's eyes, but now that Lily had pointed it out, he realized it had been there from the beginning. A loneliness that money and power couldn't touch. His phone buzzed. A text from Isabella. "Board meeting starts in 1 hour. Wish me luck." Daniel typed back quickly. "You don't need luck. You need courage, and you have more of that than anyone I know." "Easy for you to say. You're not about to potentially destroy a billion-dollar company. You're not destroying anything. You're choosing what to build." There was a long pause before her response. "I love you for believing that." "I love you for a lot of reasons. That's just one of them." The morning crawled by with agonizing slowness. Daniel tried to focus on the mundane tasks of running the garage, ordering parts, scheduling appointments, helping Tommy with a transmission rebuild, but his mind kept drifting to the drama playing out in Chicago's corporate towers. Around noon, his phone rang. Patricia Wynn's name appeared on the screen. "Mr. Hayes, I wanted to reach out personally to inform you that your consulting contract with Orion Motors has been officially terminated, effective immediately." "I see. I want you to know that the decision was purely political. Your technical contributions were invaluable, and the Meridian Core concept will likely be revisited in the future, regardless of what happens with the current project." "What about Ms. Grant, I mean?" There was a pause. "I probably shouldn't discuss internal matters, but since you'll hear about it anyway, she's tendered her resignation to the board." Daniel felt the world shift beneath his feet. Her resignation, effective at the end of the month, She's divesting her majority stake and stepping away from day-to-day operations. Thomas Cole will be assuming the role of interim CEO. The phone seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds in Daniel's hand. Isabella hadn't just chosen their relationship, she'd sacrificed everything for it. "Mr. Hayes, are you there?" "Yes, I'm here. Thank you for calling Patricia. For what it's worth, I think the board made a mistake, both with the project and with Ms. Grant. Sometimes the best leaders are the ones willing to take risks." After hanging up, Daniel stood in his garage surrounded by the familiar chaos of automotive parts and half-finished repairs, feeling like a stranger in his own life. Isabella had given up her empire for the possibility of building something together, and he wasn't even sure what that something might look like. Tommy approached cautiously, wrench in hand. "Bad news." "I'm not sure. Maybe the opposite." "Want to talk about it?" Daniel looked at his young employee, barely 19, full of enthusiasm and hope, working for minimum wage and free automotive education because he believed in the possibility of building something better. "Tommy, what would you say if I told you I was thinking about expanding the business, maybe specializing in electric vehicle repair and modification?" Tommy's eyes widened. "Dude, that would be incredible. Electric cars are the future, and most shops don't know how to work on them yet. We could be like the first wave." "It would mean taking on debt, probably working longer hours, no guarantee of success. But if it worked, we'd be positioned perfectly for when electric vehicles go mainstream, which they will eventually." Daniel smiled at Tommy's certainty. Youth had its advantages, the ability to see opportunity where experience might only see risk. "Let me think about it." His phone buzzed again. This time it was a call, not a text. Isabella's name on the screen. "Hello?" "It's done." Her voice sounded hollow, exhausted. "I'm officially unemployed as of 30 days from now." "Isabella, I'm so sorry. I never wanted you to sacrifice." "I didn't sacrifice anything, Daniel. I chose something. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Because right now it feels like you gave up everything for someone who can't offer you anything close to what you had. What I had was a prison made of stock options and board meetings. What you're offering is freedom. I'm offering you a life in a small town with a single father who fixes cars for a living. That's not freedom, that's a step backward." Isabella was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a strength he hadn't heard before. "Do you know what I did after the board meeting?" "What?" "I drove to a coffee shop near your garage. Not the fancy place downtown, but that little diner on Main Street. I sat there for 2 hours, watching people come and go, and you know what I realized?" "What?" "Everyone knew each other. The waitress asked about someone's mother who was in the hospital. The mechanic from the shop next to yours came in covered in grease, and instead of looking at him with disgust, people welcomed him like family. A mother with 3 kids couldn't afford her bill, and 2 strangers offered to cover it without being asked." Daniel could picture the scene perfectly. Miller's Diner had been a town institution for 40 years, the kind of place where community happened naturally. That's just small-town life, Isabella. It's not as romantic as it seems when you're living paycheck to paycheck. Maybe not. But it's real in a way that my life never was. When was the last time someone asked about my mother's health? When was the last time I helped a stranger pay for coffee? When was the last time I belonged somewhere instead of just owning it? The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Daniel realized that Isabella wasn't running away from success. She was running towards something she'd never had the chance to experience. So, what happens now? Now I figure out what Isabella Grant wants to be when she grows up. And I'm hoping you'll help me. Where will you start? I have some ideas, but first I have a question for you. Go ahead. Would you be interested in a business partner? Someone with capital to invest and a strong background in automotive technology, but who needs to learn everything about actually running a garage. Daniel felt his heart skip a beat. You want to work in my garage? I want to build something with you. Something that combines your expertise with my resources. Something that prepares for the future while staying rooted in the community. Isabella, you don't understand what you're suggesting. It's hard physical work, long hours, difficult customers. It's also building something meaningful. Creating jobs, serving the community, being part of something larger than quarterly projections. Daniel found himself smiling despite his concerns. You really want to get your hands dirty? I want to get my hands dirty with something that matters. With someone who matters. And if it doesn't work out, if small-town life isn't what you imagined, or if we can't make the business profitable, then we'll figure out something else. Together. The word together resonated with possibilities Daniel was only beginning to imagine. A partnership that combined his mechanical knowledge with her business acumen. A garage that could evolve with the changing automotive landscape. A future built on shared dreams rather than individual survival. There's something else, Isabella continued. I want to meet Lily properly, not as your boss or your business partner, but as the woman who loves her father. She'd like that. She's been asking when she can meet you officially. How about tonight I could drive down, maybe we could have dinner together. Nothing fancy, just the three of us. Daniel felt a warmth spreading through his chest, a sense of pieces falling into place after years of struggling to make them fit. I'd like that. We'd both like that. After they hung up, Daniel stood in his garage with a growing sense of anticipation. The practical challenges were enormous, integrating Isabella's corporate experience with small-town automotive repair, building a business model that could compete in an evolving market, navigating the personal dynamics of mixing love with entrepreneurship. But beneath the anxiety was something else: excitement. For the first time in years, he was looking forward instead of just surviving day to day. Tommy, he called out, come here for a minute. The young man emerged from under the hood of a pickup truck, wiping his hands on a rag. What's up, boss? How would you feel about being part of something bigger? Maybe training to become a certified electric vehicle technician, learning advanced diagnostic systems, building a reputation as the place to go for next-generation automotive technology. Tommy's face lit up like Christmas morning. Are you serious? Because that would be like a dream come true. I'm serious. It's going to take work, probably more than we've ever done before. But I think we might be able to build something special here. What changed yesterday? You were talking about just maintaining the status quo. Daniel looked around the garage at the worn concrete floors, the organized chaos of tools and parts, the photographs on the wall, chronicling 15 years of small victories and hard-won progress. I realized that maintaining the status quo isn't actually possible. The world is changing, whether we participate or not. The question is whether we want to be left behind or help shape what comes next. And you think we can shape it? I think we have to try. That evening, Daniel cleaned the apartment with more care than he'd shown since Sarah's death. Lily helped polishing surfaces and arranging flowers Mrs. Henderson had provided from her garden, winter blooms that somehow managed to look cheerful despite the December cold. Do you think she'll like our home? Lily asked, smoothing the tablecloth they only used for special occasions. It's not as fancy as what she's used to. That's not what I asked, Daddy. Daniel paused in his cleaning to study his daughter's serious expression. What did you ask? I asked if she'll like our home. Not our stuff, but our home. The way it feels when we're all together. What do you think? I think she's been living in fancy places her whole life, but she's never had a real home. And I think that's what she's really looking for. The insight took Daniel's breath away. At 7 years old, Lily had identified something he'd only begun to understand, that Isabella's wealth had insulated her from the very experiences that gave life meaning. Isabella arrived at 6 o'clock, driving not the Porsche, but a modest Honda that looked almost ordinary in their small parking lot. She'd traded her business suits for jeans and a sweater, her carefully styled hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked younger, more vulnerable, and somehow more beautiful than he'd ever seen her. "Hi," she said when he opened the door, and the nervousness in her voice made him love her even more. "Hi yourself. Come in, Lily's been counting the minutes." Isabella stepped into their small apartment, her eyes taking in the mismatched furniture, the photographs on the refrigerator, the general organized chaos of a home where people actually lived. "It's perfect," she said softly. "It feels like a real home. As opposed to the architectural showcase I've been living in. Beautiful to look at, but no soul." Lily appeared from the kitchen wearing her best dress and a smile that could have powered the apartment. "Hi, Isabella. I helped make dinner. Well, mostly I watched and handed Daddy things, but I stirred the sauce twice." "Hello, Lily. It's wonderful to meet you properly." Isabella knelt down to Lily's eye level, treating her with the same attention she might give a board member. "Your father talks about you constantly. He's very proud of you. He talks about you too. He gets this funny look when he says your name like he ate something sweet." Isabella laughed, a sound of pure delight. "Does he? I get the same look when I think about both of you." Dinner was simple spaghetti and meatballs, garlic bread, a salad from the bag, but the conversation flowed with surprising ease. Isabella asked Lily about school, about her friends, about her dreams of becoming either a veterinarian or an astronaut, depending on which seemed more interesting that particular day. "Why not both?" Isabella suggested. "You could be a veterinarian who takes care of animals in space." Lily's eyes widened with possibility. "Do you think there will be animals in space?" "I think if there are, they'll be very lucky to have you taking care of them." After dinner, they sat on the couch while Lily showed Isabella her drawing collection, pages and pages of crayon masterpieces depicting everything from rainbow-colored horses to elaborate space stations populated by smiling aliens. "This one's my favorite," Lily said, pointing to a drawing of 3 stick figures standing in front of a building. "That's me and Daddy and you at the new garage." Daniel felt his throat constrict. "Sweetheart, Isabella hasn't decided about the garage yet." "Yes, she has," Lily said with the confidence of someone who saw things adults missed. "She decided before she even got here. She just needed to make sure we were the kind of people she wanted to work with." Isabella caught Daniel's eye over Lily's head, her expression confirming what his daughter had somehow intuited. "Is that true?" Daniel asked. "Your daughter is very perceptive." "Yes, I've decided. Assuming you'll have me as a partner." "What convinced you?" Isabella looked around the small apartment at the family photos, the handmade Christmas decorations, the evidence of lives lived with intention rather than just accumulation. "This. The way you've built something real here, something that matters. I want to learn how to do that." Later, after Lily had gone to bed with promises that Isabella would come back soon to see her rocket ship drawings, Daniel and Isabella sat on the small balcony despite the December cold, sharing a bottle of wine and watching snow begin to fall. "Are you sure about this?" Daniel asked. "Because once we start, there's no going back to your old life." "I've never been sure about anything in my life, but I've also never wanted anything as much as I want this life, this possibility, this chance to build something meaningful with someone I love." "It won't be easy. Small-town life can be claustrophobic. People will have opinions about everything we do. Money will be tight, especially at first." "Daniel," Isabella turned to face him fully, her green eyes reflecting the streetlights below. I've spent my entire adult life being careful, making safe choices, protecting assets, minimizing risk. And what did it get me? A beautiful, empty life that I was ready to trade for one honest conversation with someone who saw me as more than a balance sheet. And now I want to take every risk I was too afraid to take before. I want to fail spectacularly if that's what it takes to succeed authentically. I want to wake up excited about what I'm building instead of worried about what I might lose. Daniel reached for her hand, marveling at how perfectly it fit in his despite their different backgrounds. There's one more thing we need to discuss. What's that? The elephant in the room. The fact that you're giving up a fortune to work in a garage in a town most people have never heard of. Isabella smiled, the first completely unguarded expression he'd ever seen from her. I'm not giving up anything, Daniel. I'm trading one kind of wealth for another. I'm choosing love over money, community over isolation, purpose over profit. That's not a sacrifice, that's the best deal I've ever made. Snow continued to fall as they talked about practical matters, business plans, financial arrangements, living situations. Isabella had enough saved to fund the garage's expansion while maintaining her own modest lifestyle. They would specialize in electric vehicle service and conversion, positioning themselves for the automotive future while serving the current community's needs. I've been thinking about a name, Isabella said as the evening wound down, for the expanded business. What did you have in mind? Hayes and Grant Automotive. Traditional enough to reassure existing customers, forward-looking enough to attract new ones. You want your name on the sign? I want our names on the sign. Equal partners in every sense. Daniel felt something shift inside him, a recognition that he was no longer the struggling single father who'd stopped to help a stranger on a cold highway. He was becoming someone new, a man building a future instead of just surviving the present. There's one condition, he said finally. What's that? Lily has to approve. This affects her life as much as ours. Isabella nodded solemnly. Of course. What do you think she'll say? Before Daniel could answer, the balcony door slid open, and Lily appeared in her pajamas, rubbing sleepy eyes. I couldn't sleep. The grown-ups are being too loud. Sorry, sweetheart. We were just talking about the business. Lily padded over to where they sat and climbed onto Daniel's lap, snuggling against his chest with the casual affection that had been his anchor for 3 years. Are you going to work together? She asked, looking between Daniel and Isabella. We're thinking about it, Isabella replied. What do you think? Lily considered this with her usual gravity. I think it's a good idea. Daddy needs someone to help him with the computer stuff, and you need someone to teach you how to fix things that are really broken. That's very wise, Isabella said. Do you think you'd like having me around more often? Will you teach me about business stuff like how to make money and manage people? Isabella laughed. If you want to learn, I'd be happy to teach you. And will you help Daddy not look so worried all the time? The question pierced straight to the heart of things. Daniel realized that despite his efforts to shield Lily from their financial struggles, she'd absorbed more anxiety than he'd thought. I'll do my best, Isabella promised. But I think having something exciting to build together will help with that. Lily nodded approvingly. Okay, but I have one rule. What's that? Daniel asked. Sunday dinners are family time. No work talk, no business meetings. Just us being together. Isabella's eyes filled with tears. I think that's the most beautiful rule I've ever heard. After Lily had been tucked back into bed, Daniel and Isabella stood in the small living room surrounded by the detritus of an evening that had changed everything. So we're really doing this, Isabella said. It wasn't a question. Apparently we are. Equal partners in a garage in Millbrook, Illinois. Population 3,847 and growing by 1. Growing by 1. You're going to need somewhere to live. I was thinking we could look for a house. Something with room for a workshop, maybe a garden for Lily. A place where we can all start over together. Isabella stepped closer, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. A house, with a garden and a workshop and room for all of us. Is that what you want? It's everything I want. Everything I never knew I was looking for. They kissed in the small living room surrounded by Lily's artwork and family photographs and the comfortable clutter of real life. It tasted like promise and possibility, like coming home to a place you'd never been before. 6 months later, Hayes and Grant Automotive opened its doors in a renovated building on the outskirts of Millbrook. The grand opening drew crowds from 3 counties curious about the garage that promised to bridge the gap between traditional automotive service and electric vehicle technology. Isabella had indeed learned to get her hands dirty, though she still wore pearls to work a compromise between her old life and her new one that somehow worked perfectly. Tommy had completed his electric vehicle certification and was training 2 new apprentices in the rapidly expanding business. The Meridian Core had eventually launched under Orion Motors' new management, becoming the commercial success Daniel had predicted. Thomas Cole received credit for the innovative thermal management system, though industry insiders knew the real story. It didn't matter, Daniel and Isabella were building something more sustainable than corporate success. On this particular Sunday evening, they gathered around the dining room table in the house they'd bought together, a farmhouse with good bones and big dreams, surrounded by land where Lily could run and Isabella could garden, and Daniel could work on his classic car collection. Tell me about the electric conversion project, Isabella said, passing a bowl of mashed potatoes that had actually been made from scratch. Mrs. Peterson's 1969 Mustang is coming along beautifully, Daniel replied. We should have it road-ready by next month. Are you going to enter it in the car show? That's the plan. First electric conversion to compete in the classic division. Lily looked up from her careful arrangement of green beans. Can I help with the next one? I know how to use the soldering iron now. Under supervision, Daniel clarified quickly. Under very careful supervision, Isabella agreed. But yes, you can help. The conversation flowed easily, touching on business successes and challenges, Lily's progress in school, Isabella's latest attempts at mastering small-town social dynamics. She'd joined the PTA, the Church Ladies Auxiliary, and the Volunteer Fire Department's fundraising committee, throwing herself into community life with the same intensity she'd once brought to corporate board meetings. After dinner, they walked to the workshop where Daniel's latest project waited, a 1965 Volkswagen bus that would become their most ambitious electric conversion yet. It's going to be beautiful when it's finished, Isabella said, running her hand along the restored exterior. It's going to be functional, Daniel corrected. Beauty is just a bonus. I'm learning that's true about a lot of things. Lily had wandered to the corner where they kept her own small workbench, child-sized tools and projects appropriate for learning hands. She was methodically organizing bolts by size, humming the same tune she'd been working on for weeks. What are you thinking about? Isabella asked, noticing Daniel's distant expression. Just all of it. A year ago, I was worried about making rent. Now we're planning to expand the business again. Lily's talking about engineering camp next summer, and I wake up every morning excited about what we're building. Any regrets? Daniel considered the question seriously. The past year had brought challenges he'd never imagined, learning to navigate a romantic relationship while raising a daughter, balancing business partnership with personal intimacy, adjusting to financial security after years of struggle. None, he said finally. Even the difficult parts have been worth it. Even when I tried to reorganize your tool system and you couldn't find anything for a week. Even then, though we're never doing that again. Isabella laughed, the sound echoing in the workshop space. Deal. I'll stick to the business side of things. You're better at the hands-on work than you give yourself credit for. That transmission you helped rebuild last month was perfect. I had a good teacher. They stood together in the workshop, surrounded by the tools of their trade and the evidence of their shared ambitions. Outside, the Illinois prairie stretched toward the horizon, punctuated by the lights of neighboring farms and the distant glow of Chicago's skyline. Daniel, Isabella said quietly, do you think we would have found each other if your car hadn't broken down that morning? I don't know. Maybe not then, maybe not in that way. But I think we would have found each other eventually. How can you be sure? Because some things are inevitable, like gravity or sunrise or the way Lily arranges her cereal in perfect rows. We were both looking for the same thing, we just didn't know it yet. What were we looking for? Daniel pulled her closer, breathing in the scent of her shampoo mixed with motor oil and possibility. Home. Not a place, but a feeling. The sense that we belonged somewhere with someone building something that mattered. Isabella tilted her face up to look at him, her green eyes reflecting the workshop's fluorescent lights. And did we find it? Look around, Daniel said softly. We didn't just find it. We built it. As if summoned by their conversation, Lily appeared at Daniel's elbow with a small wrapped package. What's this, sweetheart? It's for both of you. I made it in art class. Isabella knelt down to Lily's level as she unwrapped the gift, a ceramic plaque painted in bright colors with words carefully written in a 7-year-old's precise handwriting. For Daniel and Isabella, who fix more than just cars. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Isabella's quiet tears. Lily, this is beautiful, she managed. Where did you get the idea? From watching you guys. You fixed Daddy's sad heart, and he fixed your lonely one. And together you fixed our whole family. Daniel felt his own eyes fill as he looked at the plaque, at his daughter's proud face, at the woman who had transformed their lives by choosing love over security. Where should we hang it? Isabella asked. In the office, Lily said decisively. So everyone who comes here can see that this is a place where everything gets fixed. Later that evening, after the plaque had been hung in a place of honor, and Lily had been tucked into bed with promises of pancakes in the morning, Daniel and Isabella sat on their front porch swing, watching stars emerge in the clear December sky. A year ago, if someone had told me I'd be sitting on a farmhouse porch in small-town Illinois, planning electric vehicle conversions with a man I met on the highway, I'd have suggested therapy, Isabella said. And now I can't imagine being anywhere else. A car drove by on the county road, its headlights sweeping across their property before disappearing into the distance. In the morning, the driver might bring that car to Hayes and Grant Automotive for service, becoming part of the community they were building, one relationship at a time. Do you think we'll still be doing this in 20 years? Isabella asked. The business, all of it. The business, the partnership, the life we're building together. Daniel considered the question, thinking about the challenges they'd already overcome and the ones that surely lay ahead. Building a business was difficult enough. Building a relationship was even more complex. Building a family required courage he was still learning to access. I think, he said finally, that we'll keep building whatever makes us happy. Maybe it'll be the garage, maybe it'll be something we haven't imagined yet. But we'll build it together. Together. Isabella repeated the word, carrying the weight of promise and possibility. Together. Daniel confirmed, pulling her closer as the winter wind picked up around them. Above their heads, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, witness to countless human stories of love and loss, risk and reward, the endless courage required to build something beautiful from the broken pieces of what came before. In the workshop behind the house, the Volkswagen bus waited patiently for its transformation from abandoned relic to electric pioneer. In the office, Lily's plaque caught the moonlight, its message a testament to the power of fixing what seems irreparably broken. And on the front porch of a farmhouse in Millbrook, Illinois, two people who had found each other on the coldest morning of the year sat together in the darkness, planning a future that would be built not on what they'd lost, but on everything they'd discovered they could create when they stopped running from love and started running toward it. The story that had begun with a broken-down car on a frozen highway had become something neither of them could have scripted, a love that transformed not just two hearts, but an entire community's understanding of what was possible when people chose courage over caution, partnership over isolation, and hope over fear. In the end, that's what the best love stories do. They remind us that the most profound changes often begin with the simplest acts of kindness, and that sometimes the person you stop to help on the side of the road is actually stopping to help you find your way home.